Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Josh Hadley, and we're just gonna kind of get into what's bothering me right away. Because something's always bothering me. That's something you'll learn very quickly. There's always something bothering me. Because later on, I'll give you more of that 10 shows you may or may not remember. 10 shows, sci-fi shows you might be interested in, or you might not. You might look at me and go, these all suck. You're an idiot and you know nothing. And you would be 100% fair by saying that as well. But right now, there was 2 teasers released in this last week. And one of them is I just do not care. It's so bland. It's so, I just don't care. And the other one is so insulting, I think that's what we're going to talk about for this segment. So the first one is Chucky, which is just a terrible title all the way around. All right, I was never a big fan of the Child's Play movies. I'm older. I saw them all in the theater. Well, I mean, when they were still called Child's Play. I thought they were just okay. They were okay horror films. They weren't great. They weren't bad. And then when they became the Chucky series, that's what they became referred to as, Chucky. It's the Chucky series. They stopped being called Child's Play. They were Chucky after the third one. And now you've got these 2 separate universes due to the weird legalities around, like, I think it's Paramount and the production company, and you've got the stuff in the remake, and then you've got stuff in the direct-to-video movies, and these can't touch one another, and there are certain aspects that can't be in one version that are in another version, and all of this nonsense. And now you've got this new Sci-Fi Channel and USA Network, Chucky the series. And if it's not clear, I think calling it Chucky is a really terrible title. Calling it Child's Play wouldn't help much either. But calling it Chucky is just beyond stupid. But that teaser that they released is the very definition of bland. It's the definition of who cares? You keep seeing this. This is sort of a trend that keeps happening. Where we're going to take maybe not something that's one note, but something that would technically be limited in the fact that you can't stretch it out. And that is something like the Child's Play movies. You can't really get a TV series out of that. First of all, you're going to get incredibly repetitive. That's going to be a huge problem. It's going to be so ridiculously repetitive that you'll probably be able to tune into any episode and get the same basic story. Especially because they said this is really returning Chucky to his slasher movie roots, blah, blah, blah. But then, I can't remember what channel or what streaming service, but they also said they're going to make a Hellraiser series. And you ask yourself, okay, there are stories you could tell about the Cenobites and about Hellraiser. Could you really do this over 13 hours? Is there really enough story to tell for Hellraiser, let alone Chucky? I think with Hellraiser, there's a hell of a lot more story, no pun intended, because you could get into the Lamont configuration, maybe how Cenobites become Cenobites, how, as in the earlier movies, it is not hands that call us, but desire, and why they didn't go after the people opening the boxes, where all of a sudden, they knew that that's not the person that called him. And the comic books did this great. The Epic Comic stuff for Hellraiser had so many fantastic, weird, it was basically an anthology of all this stuff that's going on in the Hellraiser universe at different points, and you're in feudal Japan, and you're in the Old West, and all this. But for the Hellraiser series, they said it's going to be one long, season-wide story arc. And you ask yourself, who's asking for that? That sounds so dull, doesn't it? It just sounds like it's going to be drug out like Westworld is. Westworld might be, to me, the most padded show I've ever seen. I have problems with The Walking Dead in the same aspect where you're just like, we don't need to see everything in real time, them walking from one location to another. That's not interesting. I gave up on Westworld pretty early on because I kept screaming at the screen, do something! Watching a horse take a rider for 3.5 minutes across a beautiful landscape is not good television to me. That's like self-filleting nonsense. And that's what I think you're going to get with the Chucky series. It's going to either be super repetitive, or it's going to be so stretched out, you're going to scream at your screen, just please do something. You're not doing anything. On the other hand, the other thing I want to complain about right off the bat is Lower Decks. Now, I've been a Star Trek fan since I was born. I'm not exaggerating when I say Star Trek was playing in the birthing room when I was born. My dad can't remember what episode it was, but they had a TV on there to give the woman something to concentrate on. So there, he said, when I was born, there was a Star Trek episode, which would be classic Trek at this point, on the television. So I was literally born into Star Trek. That may have been one of the very first things I ever heard as an infant. So I've been a Star Trek fan. I followed The Next Generation. I watched all those episodes first run. Deep Space Nine. I was right there when UPN premiered with the premiere of Voyager in 1995. Enterprise is where it kind of lost me. And then there's no easy way to say it, but Star Trek Discovery, I thought was the worst, the lowest Star Trek could ever dip. I thought, okay, this is so bad. There's no possible way Star Trek can ever get worse than Star Trek Discovery. And, well, then Alex Kurtzman said, hold my beer! Because then Star Trek Picard comes out, and Star Trek Picard is so much worse than Discovery could ever hope to be. The horrible writing, the inept production, the look at us, we're the Game of Thrones of outer space nonsense that Alex Kurtzman just seems to live on was all on display in Picard. Picard is not the worst thing that Star Trek has ever been attached to. It's one of the worst things that's ever happened. It will take a lot for me to find a television series that pisses me off more than Star Trek Picard does. And then Alex Kurtzman said, you still holding my beer? And we got the trailer for Lower Decks. This thing looks like such an abomination that I might have to eat my words and say that Picard is no longer the worst. Because Lower Decks, and we've only got a trailer to go off of, fine. Maybe the show won't be that bad, but we all know it will. Lower Decks looks like it is the not only lowest common denominator, but it looks like they are punching down below their weight class so hard that it's how does something this abominable make it to the air? It's like CBS and CBS All Access are determined to bury everything that Star Trek once stood for. That they are determined under Alex Kurtzman's tutorialship that they said, we want to destroy everything you once loved about Star Trek. And it's not that I'm thinking, oh, Star Trek can't make fun of itself. Oh, no. Star Trek can absolutely be made fun of. You could make a comedy Star Trek series. I don't have a problem with that. But there's no humor in this. The jokes, in quotes, are so bad that it was actually shocking that these not only got approved, but somebody said, yes, this is what's going to work. I mean, I can't stand Rick and Morty, but Rick and Morty is pure genius compared to what is in that Lower Decks trailer. And I also hate the animation. I hate the style of jokes. Blast shield goes up, blast shield goes down, blast shield goes up, blast shield goes down. That's like season 1 Family Guy humor. What are you doing for this? This is without a doubt a 1-season show. No one's going to watch it. No one's going to like it. And they dumped how many millions of dollars into this travesty? And that also brings up the question, why? Because Alex Kurtzman, besides being one of the biggest hacks that's ever failed upwards in Hollywood, because somehow this man is so bad at what he does, yet he continues to fail upwards. It defies how Hollywood, well, I was going to say is supposed to work, but we all know that is how Hollywood works. You absolutely fail upwards. But Alex Kurtzman seems to have such a disdain for everything, not only Star Trek, but everything you once loved. He has this Rian Johnson sort of, I just am making this to see how much I can piss off the fans of whatever fan base I happen to be destroying this month. Alex Kurtzman being behind the Star Trek architecture. He was called the architect of Star Trek once the CBS Paramount and all that nonsense. He was their architect. And that proved right there that they were determined this does not work. This will not work. We are determined that this will not work. That's where my problem comes in. Alex Kurtzman is a man who should never be allowed the reins of anything again. And yet he keeps getting larger and larger projects. It's sort of like Damon Lindelof, who again constantly fails upwards. Akiva Goldsman, who might, without a doubt, I think, be the worst screenwriter in the history of mainstream Hollywood, and now writes books and teaches classes on screenwriting. That says so much right there about how little they care about you. And if you think that they care about you at all, go and watch that Lower Decks trailer again. They don't care about you. They don't care about what you like. Their whole mission is to destroy every single thing you ever liked about Star Trek. That's what Picard is. Picard is the antithesis of Star Trek. In fact, Picard is not Star Trek. I'll say that straight up. I'm not even putting this up for debate. Picard is not Star Trek. Lower Decks is not Star Trek. Discovery, I can see in a way how they were kind of going, well, it's kind of Star Trek, but we wanted to give it a Game of Thrones sheen. Picard and Lower Decks are not Star Trek. You are free to agree with me. Everyone has the right to be wrong. That's fine. But if you're a Star Trek fan and you laughed at even one thing in that Lower Decks trailer, I feel bad for you. Because that Lower Decks trailer is a complete encapsulation of everything wrong with modern humor when it comes to a storied franchise, an old franchise. All they want to do is destroy everything you once loved. And that is what I cannot stand, and I will not stand for. And you shouldn't stand for it either. So, to the Lower Decks trailer, I'm not allowed to swear on this, and I'm not going to, but I think you know what swear word I want to use when I say you and then Lower Decks. Because this is just so insulting. I got some Star Wars Detours vibes off this. If you guys don't remember this, go look up the Star Wars Detours trailer. It was basically the same thing. We're going to make a wacky animated series by Seth Green and Seth MacFarlane. It's all going to be satirizing Star Wars, and it's going to be so funny. And you go and watch that 3.5-minute Star Wars Detours trailer, and you will be not only stone-faced, you might be suicidal after you see it, and you know what a bullet was dodged when Lucasfilm saw that and said, nope, this is not happening. And they made 36 complete episodes of Detours that have never seen the light of day, because even Lucasfilm said, this is beyond base level. This is beyond base. That's what I immediately thought of when I started watching the Star Wars Lower Decks trailer. I immediately got this Star Wars Detours thing in my head, and I went, oh man, I'm getting so much flashback on this. Except Lower Decks will actually come out, and then you'll be called a stupid crying man baby because you can't see how fantastic it is, and blah, 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 blah. Picard might not be the worst thing that's ever happened anymore. It might be Lower Decks. We will have to wait and see how that plays out. After that, though, I'm going to talk about something that annoys me about the internet and how you can get around it, and then we'll be looking at a filmmaker who maybe you haven't seen a lot of movies from that I think you should check out, and then finally we'll be looking at some more weirdo TV shows. But we will be back after this break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
So, okay, something that really bothers me, I'm sure you see this all the time on the internet, whether it's YouTube or lists and things. First of all, I hate lists. I hate listicles. Listicles are the absolute worst. But you see this thing, hey, here's the top 11 things you didn't know about Batman. Here's the top 11 things you didn't know about The Mask. Here's the top 11 things you didn't know about Mystery Science Theater 3000, whatever. These things bug me so much because, one, there's this inherent arrogance to them. If anyone who knows me in real life knows, I can't stand arrogance. I just cannot stand arrogance. You can be better than me. That's 100% fine. But if you go out of your way to remind me how much better than me you are, then I'm going to start hating you. And you see all of these listicles out there. And the problem with these listicles is, one, if you're like me and you've watched way too many movies, read way too many books, read way too many comics, watched way too many hours, and wasted way too many years of your life on science fiction, horror, fantasy, etc. These things, not only do I already know everything that is in these listicles, they usually get something wrong in them, but there's also the fact of, just think about that arrogance I was talking about. I know something you don't know, and I am going to dean my wisdom onto you. Aren't you so lucky? Because first of all, it's not even first of all at this point, I probably said that before. Most of these listicles they listen to the commentary track on the DVD. And it said, yeah, I have that same DVD. I listened to that same commentary track. So, wow, you are so much smarter than me. You have a DVD player. And so do I. And in a lot of cases, they'll even have the what you didn't know is in the same order as the commentary. These people, they get this thing where they want to feel special, and they're not special. That's sort of the problem. They aren't special because I know something you don't know. No, you don't. That's why people come to people like me. I have been contacted by numerous pre-COVID, obviously, talk shows, things like that, when they're looking for something that even they can't find. I've worked with the David Letterman show when they needed some footage of something, and guess who had it? I had it. The Morton Downey Jr. documentary, the Evocateur documentary. Literally, and I'm not exaggerating, my name is listed right next to CNN under archive footage because they had to come to me to find this stuff. So if anyone should be arrogant and holding something over you, it should be me, and I don't. I want to give you this knowledge. Like in the next segment, we're going to talk about a filmmaker. You may know, you may not. I'm not going to say, here's a filmmaker and some movies you've never heard of. Hopefully you've heard of them. And if you haven't, hopefully you will take my recommendation and go, you know what? These sound pretty cool. This filmmaker sounds pretty cool. I wish I'd heard of him before. I would be fine with if these listicles were like, hey, here's 10 facts. Here's 11 facts about whatever the topic is that you didn't know. I'd be okay with that. But they don't. They have to get that arrogance. Here's things you didn't know, but I knew. And I think that's partially due to the internet, because you didn't really see these in print magazines. You didn't see Fangoria or Starlog or Cinema Fantastique publishing these kind of things. There's this weird thing about the internet where when you get a piece of information, like say, you watch the commentary track, you listen to a commentary track and you're like, man, this stuff is fascinating. Without even maybe going to check, hey, I wonder if anyone else has talked about this. You're like, oh, I gotta type. Here, I know things other people don't know. When you, first of all, never thought of the fact that you do know other people can own that DVD as well, and that they've listened to that same commentary track. It's a lot different in the pre-internet days when you had to read tons of books. You had to read tons of magazines to find the actual thing you were talking about, which is also another problem. You see this all the time where, you'll say something online or you'll see something and it'll come up, well, you always have that one know-it-all in the comments. Well, actually, and they're usually wrong because they're going off, say, a commentary track or one of these listicles. And I've had this numerous times where I should not have to go dig through 40 years of old Starlog issues and take a photograph of an article that's not online anywhere from 1982, for example, to show them, no, I am right, you arrogant jerk. You're not. And then they always, well, how was I supposed to know? Because you are not supposed to be so arrogant that you think you're smarter than everybody else. I've been wrong. I've said a lot of things that are wrong. I say stupid crap all the time. I once I went through an entire show where I meant to say William Friedkin. And for some reason, I kept saying Wes Craven. Was I wrong? Yes, it was just something in my brain. I kept saying Wes Craven when I'm talking about The Exorcist. And it was like, wait, but you sound like an idiot when you do that, when I listened back to it. And that's the thing. If there's this arrogance that comes with these know-it-all things. If it's not on the internet, well, then it's wrong. And that's part of a problem, too. I shouldn't have to prove to you a piece of trivia or something about a movie is right. You should have to prove to me I'm wrong. That is what we're talking about here. And that's the problem. So many of these old magazines, I have probably thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, issues of magazines in my basement, bagged and boarded, all in boxes. I should not have to constantly go dig through those to show some jackass online that no, what I quoted is what was quoted in Fangoria issue 18, page 42, or whatever it was. That's why I hate these listicles. Because they're all just things you can find on the IMDb trivia page. But I'm so much smarter than you because you don't have IMDb. Yes, I do. Stop being a jerk. I don't understand why the sci-fi community just can't have... Why it can't be a community anymore. Why it's always got to be this one-upmanship. Like, I went and saw, obviously, again, pre-COVID, I went and saw the Bruce Campbell live show... I think it was last November. And, he showed Evil Dead 2. He was there with a presentation and all this. And it was really fun. My girlfriend and I went. I'd never seen Evil Dead 2 on a theater screen before. And Bruce was fine. Bruce was hilarious. And the problem was, besides the fact that he has some of the worst fans in the world, these people are people I would never want to know in real life. But that's a whole different discussion. But the thing was, before the show, these people kept one-upping them, trying to one-up themselves. Oh yeah, well I've got an Evil Dead 2 tie poster hanging on my wall. Oh yeah, well I have a really super rare Japanese Army of Darkness poster. Oh yeah, well I have a reproduction of the Kandarian dagger from Evil Dead 2. And all these guys are just going back and forth trying to, I'm a bigger fan. No, I'm a bigger fan. No, I'm a bigger fan. I almost wanted to, and I would have been falling into their trap, say, you guys do know that I've talked to Bruce Campbell and I interviewed him in person just, about a week before this, right? And I have his home phone number. I almost wanted to do that. But just this constant one-upsmanship, that's not what being part of a sci-fi fandom is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a fandom. It's not supposed to be, I'm a bigger fan than you. Oh, no. I'm a bigger fan than you. Oh, yeah, well, I have the first script with missing pages from the Invaders from Mars remake from 1986, so I'm a bigger fan. Oh, yeah, well, I have Freddy Krueger's spit that he spit out during Freddy's Revenge. I have that saved because my uncle was a PA on that movie, so I'm a bigger fan. That's not what this is supposed to be. I know it seems like I'm angry, and I kind of am. Because this is supposed to be, when I was growing up, being a sci-fi fan was a very different thing. It was very inclusive, maybe because it was smaller. I got beat up all the time for reading comic books. I got beat up all the time for watching Star Trek. I got made fun of constantly for having subscriptions to Fangoria and Starlog and Cinema Fantastique, while the real people were reading 17 and not ESPN magazine, Sports Illustrated and that kind of thing. And we all bonded with each other. We didn't try to one-up each other. It was, hey, let's enjoy our collective fandom together. Let's watch when Cast a Deadly Spell first premieres on HBO. Let's watch that together, not, I got to see it early because I had a screener because I know somebody. That's not what fandom is supposed to be about. But that's what it's become. The internet has splintered everything to such a ridiculous degree that it angers me. And these top 11, top 10, top whatever things you don't know listicles are just a culmination of that. It's that arrogance of, I know something you don't know. And I am just sick to death of this nonsense. That's what we need to stop. You might say, all I am is negative. And that's fine. This segment and the last segment, I was being negative. In the next two segments, I'm going to be positive. So maybe that makes you a little bit happier. Because I'm going to be recommending things to you. I'm not going to be telling you, oh, well, see, I saw these things, so I'm better than you, though. I'm not going to say, oh, hey, when we talk about filmmaker Richard Stanley in the next break, that, oh, well, see, here's the thing. I've interviewed Richard Stanley. I've met Richard Stanley. I watched all of his movies when they first came out, so I'm better than you. Wouldn't that make you feel like crap if that's the way I went about the next segment? But that's not the way it's going to work. I'm going to recommend these movies to you. Maybe they're lesser known films. Maybe they're things you just haven't heard of. Maybe they're things that are just not in your orbit. And that is 100% fine. I'm not going to be arrogant about it. You shouldn't be arrogant about it. And you should stop if you're one of these people that watches a YouTube video or listens to a show like this and is just waiting, their hands positioned on the keyboard in the QWERTY position going, I'm dying to, well, actually, and then you start typing like you're Nemo at the pipe organ. No, don't be that person. If there's a legitimate mistake in somebody's video, first of all, there's no reason to call them out on it. I saw one recently. It was a history of the Sci-Fi channel, and the guy made 2 factual errors that I knew were factual. Messaged him privately. He thanked me for that. I could have been one of those guys that just said, you know what, I'm going to out this guy. I'm going to be an arrogant jerk. But I just said, hey, dude, I really liked your video, but you got these 2 things wrong. Here's what actually happened. Here's my notes on it, my quotations. Or my citations on it, and here's why. And I would appreciate that. I would really hate it if somebody went into the video, well, actually, you see this, and then I want to smack you because I know I'm right and I can prove I'm right, and I'm sick of having to prove I'm right. So that's a problem there. So after we take a break, we're going to look at the weird career that might be shorter than, if you've never heard of him, then it might be a little bit shorter than you think it is, but of Richard Stanley. Maybe that's a filmmaker you know the name of, maybe it's a filmmaker you don't, but almost everything he's made is beyond fantastic. So we're going to talk about Richard Stanley when we come back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So we talked about the smarmy arrogance a little bit ago, and what we're going to do in this segment is there's a filmmaker out there. He's kind of had a career comeback in 2019, but his name is Richard Stanley. He's a South African filmmaker that was actually based out of London, but he is South African, and that kind of comes into play later. He's really only made 3 movies. He's worked on other movies, but he's made 3 movies. You may have heard of them, you may have not. I cannot recommend higher the 3 movies we're going to talk about here, though. The man has got a visual eye that just cannot be overlooked. His movies look like Dario Argento and James Cameron's movies had sex behind an alley, and this was the love child. He loves color. As Joe Dante once put it, color is the cheapest special effect you can ever have. And one thing I hate is these movies that leach color out, these Saw-looking movies where everything is monotone and drab. Whereas Richard Stanley movies are just dripping with color. Even if it doesn't necessarily make sense where that colored light might be coming from, it makes everything look really, really good. Possibly because he came from the world of music videos. He made some music videos for John Lydon's Public Image Limited. He made music videos for Renegade Soundwave. He made music videos for The Fields of the Nephilim. And more than anything, once you're familiar with Richard Stanley's style, you can really see it in the Fields of the Nephilim stuff. His style is so distinct in that. And that's one of the things about Richard Stanley. He has a really distinct visual style to the point where after a while, you'll be able to recognize it. And he started his career with a couple of short films shot on 8mm with no live sound. And his debut feature was in 1990 from Miramax called Hardware. It was called Mark 13 in Europe, but Hardware everywhere else. And the movie is just a visual masterpiece. It's got so many unique camera angles, great lighting, beautiful camera work, and all of it for under $1 million. I think it was 990,000 pounds, which equals to just under, at that level's exchange rate in that year of 1990, just under $1 million. And you'd never guess this movie only cost $1 million. It just looks so beyond phenomenal. You would never say, this is $1 million movie. You'd look at this and go, this is a $10 or $15 million film. And the thing with Hardware is it's in a very dystopian future. You've got some it's I guess if you want to boil it down, it's about a killer Terminator style robot trapped in an apartment with a couple of people. But that really sells it short. It's full of world building. It's full of this hints of this much, much larger world. And it's a very influential film because there are things in the Fallout games that are absolutely based on things in Hardware. There are things in later video games that are absolutely based on things in Hardware. And I would be remiss if I said there wasn't I don't know if I want to say plagiarism, but there was a bit of a plagiarism sort of thing because apparently the stories vary on when it comes to Hardware, whether this was stolen or a misinterpretation, but Hardware is unofficially based on a 2000 AD short story called Shock, S-H-O-K, which is about a killer droid trapped in an apartment with a lady. And there, like I said, there are differing stories. Sometimes it's said that it was straight plagiarism. Others, we thought we had the rights, but it turned out we didn't, so that's why it wasn't acknowledged. And so I don't know who to believe on that, but Hardware is just an amazing film. It stars Dylan McDermott and Stacey Travis, and it has cameos by Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead, Iggy Pop, Gwar is in it, kind of. You'll understand when you see the movie. Amazing soundtrack with PIL, Ministry, and Motorhead, Iggy Pop. It's just got this fantastic look to it, this fantastic style. I cannot recommend Hardware enough. Well, that movie did pretty decent for Richard Stanley. So 2 years later, he made his next movie for Miramax again, and that would be called Dust Devil. This one's less sci-fi, more horror fantasy. There's a line in there that there's this magical being. It's like a sexual serial killer, and he still, and I quote, inhabits the parts of the world where magic still lingers. And that is just a fantastic, an utterly fantastic line. And with that, it's set in South Africa, in Namibia, when Namibia was dying. And so you get these gorgeous, borderline post-apocalyptic visuals. Dust Devil is possibly one of the most beautiful films you'll ever see. I'm just talking on a cinematography level. Dust Devil might be one of the most gorgeous films you will ever sit through. But the problem is, you got to find the right cut of it. Because Miramax was not happy with what Stanley turned in, so they cut the movie to ribbons. They released like an 84-minute version, which is incomprehensible. That's the one you can find on VHS. That's the one that was released to critics in 1992. A complete incomprehensible mess. Then there was a director's cut released on Laserdisc in the late 90s, which is really, really damn good. And then there's finally, I think it's called the Final Cut, which is been released on DVD and Blu-ray, and that's what you should go look for. You won't be disappointed on a visual level. It's a very slow movie, but it's meant to be slow. It's meant to unfold very slowly. It's not a slasher movie. It's not an action movie, although there are slasher moments in it, and there are action moments in it as well. But you've got American actors Chelsea Field and Robert John Burke in there. Robert John Burke you may recognize as RoboCop from RoboCop 3. And Chelsea Field's been in everything. She maybe most famously was Bruce Willis's wife in The Last Boy Scout. But Dust Devil, you will be knocked off your chair with Dust Devil. And you might think I'm wrong. You might think I'm overselling it, and you have every right to think that. And then Dust Devil's lack of success due to the Weinsteins and Weinstein Scissorhands really kind of sidelined Stanley's career for a while. Worked on some more music videos, things like that. Then eventually he was going to make, for New Line, the big budget, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Yes, the one with Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando. And he did all the production design work, and after about 2 weeks of filming, some say less, he was fired when he couldn't get along with Val Kilmer, and all of this nonsense happened. So The Island of Dr. Moreau is not his fault. I believe it's John Frankenheimer that took over, and Frankenheimer did not care at all about the movie. And so I'm not really going to call Island of Dr. Moreau a Richard Stanley movie. It's more an abortion of a Richard Stanley movie. And then he frittered around for a while. He wrote some screenplays for movies that he had no real part of, and they're just okay. He wrote a ton of screenplays. I could do a whole show on the unmade Richard Stanley movies, and they all sound absolutely fantastic. But then he did a segment for The Theater Bazaar, which was an anthology movie, and as much as I love Richard Stanley, he made the weakest segment. I think his segment of The Frog Queen just is the weakest one in an already weak anthology film. So that was not a high point for him, but from what I understand, from when I've spoken to him, is that he really didn't have a lot of money for it, didn't have a lot of time, it's called The Mother of Toads is actually the title. It's just weak. Theater Bazaar is a weak project, and Mother of Toads just didn't work. And then he would fritter around for a while, and then for years he was trying to get off the ground. Another couple of movies that never happened. He was going to make one called Vacation with Bruce Campbell that almost happened, but Bruce Campbell got the Roland Byrne notice, so, well, that didn't happen. He still hopes to make Vacation one day, although now I think Bruce Campbell's a little too old for it. But he eventually was working very hard. He was a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan, and he would eventually make H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space with Nick Cage and Tommy Chong last year. And man, that is a comeback film of a comeback film. Oh my God, Color Out of Space was so good. You could see a lot of the Richard Stanley trademarks. If you grew up watching Hardware on VHS, like I did through the 90s, if you ended up, I didn't have the Laserdisc at the time, but I had a Laserdisc bootleg of Dust Devil, of the director's cut. I watched the music videos. You would have seen the Fields of the Nephilim videos on 120 Minutes, things like that. And if you knew Richard Stanley, you would immediately understand why The Color Out of Space was so good. Now, does it change a lot from the Lovecraft story? Yeah, it kind of has to. But at the same time, it's respectful and honestly keeps a lot of the story intact as much as you could with needing to change certain things that just don't work anymore, like, Lovecraft's writing. His writing is very stiff to the point where you can't... Lovecraft's kind of unfilmable in a way. And The Color Out of Space was a triumph, I thought. It was a great comeback, great word of mouth, great critical reviews, and he's supposedly making a Lovecraft universe where The Color Out of Space, without giving too much away, it ends in a certain way that there's a character that's going to be moving on to what the next project is supposed to be, which is Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror. Now we'll have to see how that actually plays out, whether that happens or not, but I'm highly recommending Hardware, Dust Devil, and The Color Out of Space. You can pretty much skip the Theater Bizarre, The Mother of Toads. I would also recommend the Renegade Soundwave video. I would recommend Public Image Limited's The Body, which he directed. I would recommend Fields of the Nephilims videos, especially Preacher Man. Once you've watched Hardware and then you watch Preacher Man, you go, oh my God, does this feel like Richard Stanley? So Richard Stanley, he's kind of an unknown filmmaker. A lot of people outside of hardcore film geek circuits don't really know the guy. That's why I'm trying to turn you guys onto him. I'm trying to say, you should check out Richard Stanley movies. Watch the evolution of his career. Watch Hardware and then Dust Devil and then Color Out of Space. And it's three kind of different movies. They'll all appeal to the sci-fi guy in you, or gal. But Hardware, it's kind of this dirty, proto-cyberpunk sort of feel, very gory, very mean. And then you go to Dust Devil, and it's this slower, more melodic, more beautiful, more showing rather than telling kind of thing. And there's some absolutely beautiful shots in it. And then you go to Color Out of Space, which is more a horror fantasy with alien things in it. And they all look different, but they all are to the point where when you look at a Richard Stanley film, like I said, once you know his style, you can immediately recognize it. And you can see, even though his style has evolved, you can see the evolution of that style. It's sort of like with Sam Raimi. When Sam Raimi is not just doing whatever he can to not have to be a good filmmaker like the Oz Great and Powerful or anything like that. You go and look at Crime Wave and Evil Dead 2 and stuff, and Sam Raimi's visual style is all over that. You don't even have to think about it. You're like, wow, that is a Sam Raimi shot. And once you learn about Richard Stanley, you'll absolutely do that too. You'll go, wow, does this feel like Richard Stanley? So check these movies out. Dust Devil, well, in order, Hardware, Dust Devil, and The Color Out of Space, and some of the music videos. And then when we come back, I'll show you 10 more TV shows that you should probably check out. You may have heard of them, you may not have. So we'll see how that plays out. But I cannot recommend higher. You have to go and check out these movies, and then we'll be back in a minute, and we'll look at some more weird television.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
So television has always been weird, and I'm going to be jumping all around a timeline here for some more sci-fi shows. Most of these are really short-lived that you should probably check out. Like, how many of you even remember Space Rangers from 1992? That's what I thought. Space Rangers was one of those shows that I don't even know why it was on CBS. I really don't. It doesn't feel right. It feels like something that would have been on one of the cable channels. They didn't air the episodes in order, and it only had 6 episodes made, only 2 of which aired before it was canceled, and then eventually Space Rangers was rerun. They ran all 6 episodes on one of the Stars channels for some reason, because sure, why not? It's not to the point where you're going to go, oh wow, this would have been a fantastic show if it had gone on. But Space Rangers, when you watch all 6 episodes, in the proper order no less, you'll say to yourself, this was kind of neat. I see why it didn't work, but this was kind of neat. And then there's something like Tracker. If you liked Highlander, the series, Tracker was Adrian Paul's follow-up to Highlander. Only lasted 1 season, and it was sort of The Hidden meets Highlander. Adrian Paul is an alien energy being, and Garrett Wynn Davies from Forever Knight is an alien criminal who killed Adrian Paul's children and wife, very much like The Hidden. And there was like a prison ship crash from all these alien beings, and it crashed on Earth into a train, and so like 147 of these beings took over the bodies of the people in the train, so Adrian Paul has to track them all down, hence the Tracker part of this, and has to return them all to the space prison while avoiding Garrett Wynn Davies. It didn't 100% work. It's very episodic. There are some good ideas in it. You get Adrian Paul basically playing Duncan MacLeod again, but an alien Duncan MacLeod. The episodes are kind of blandly shot. There's some interesting guest appearances, and you can tell that they ran out of money at the end, because even in the 2000s, when your season finale is a freaking clip show, you ran out of money. But Tracker is worth, no pun intended, tracking down if you can find it. It's not available on DVD. I'm just speaking from America here. It's not available on DVD. And like with Space Rangers, that is available on DVD, but it's out of print, so you're going to pay $60 or $70 to find it. But you can probably find them on YouTube a lot easier. But Tracker is worth checking out. You might like it, you might not. It's very early 2000s, and it'll be kind of funny if you can see just what long-distance company happened to sponsor this show. Because, wow, they are not subtle about getting some of the sponsorships into this show. It's almost Hawaii Five-0 Bing It levels of, well, that was subtle. And then there was the short-lived anthology series Dark Room, hosted by James Coburn in 1981. It was just a normal anthology series with 2 half-hour horror stories per hour-long segment. Has a really cool opening, has some interesting stories. Some work, some don't. And the interesting thing is you get to see like Helen Hunt before she was famous, and you get to see Billy Crystal before he was really famous, and that there are some interesting guest spots in Dark Room. Dark Room's not one of those ones that would ever really make a place in history where you're going to go, man, that Dark Room was just so classic. Why'd they have to cancel it? But at the same time, you'll say to yourself, you know what? Dark Room was actually pretty good. There were some good stories in it. Then there's something like Dimension 404 from 2017. This was a Hulu series, and it was just trying to be sort of a more lighthearted Black Mirror. It didn't work at all for me, but there was a certain charm to it. Dimension 404 is, I think it's 6 or 8 episodes. It's nothing that you're going to walk away from remembering, but you might look at it years later and go, oh, I do remember seeing that. I remember that one with Patton Oswalt with the mustard stain on his shirt. I do remember that. That's the most you're going to walk away with from Dimension 404. But at the same time, I wouldn't recommend something if I don't think you should at least check it out and give it a shot. Just like, speaking of anthologies, Night Visions in 2001. This was a Fox show that was trying really hard to be a new Twilight Zone. And one of the things that got me into it, besides the fact that I would have watched a show like this anyway, was it was hosted by Henry Rollins in sort of the Rod Serling role. And the problem with that is, as much as I like Henry Rollins and as charismatic as Henry Rollins can be, he looks beyond nervous in the host segments. He looks like he wants to be anywhere but in front of this camera. Now, he said he was very excited to do this show, so I don't know why he looks so uncomfortable hosting the show. And it had some really good episodes. The episode Patterns might be one of the most brilliant half hours that I would have seen in 2001. It was just so brilliantly written. And I mean, come on, you got Malcolm McDowell as a crazy man. Can you get better casting than that? You had directors like Joe Dante making segments of it. And just like any anthology show, it is so hit and miss. There are some episodes where you'll walk away going, that was fantastic. And then the second episode that hour, you'll go, that was so bland. That was so lifeless. What was the point of that? So Night Visions is something you should check out, but be aware that for every good story in one of these episodes, there's going to be one that's going to just piss you off for not being good. And Joe Dante would agree with that. He directed 2 episodes of it, and he cannot watch them. He was so angry with how one of them turned out, he almost had his name taken off of it. So that says something right there. But I think if nothing else, you'll look for the episode Patterns with Malcolm McDowell. But then there's also animated shows like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the animated series, which is one of the weirder entries because it was done, I think, to cash in on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles craze, because the third movie had not come out yet, or had just come out, I don't remember, and they made the animated series, which was extremely self-aware. The characters know that they're in a cartoon. They break the fourth wall constantly, and it follows the events of Return of the Killer Tomatoes with Dr. Gangrene, still voiced by John Astin too, which is pretty cool. And Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the first season was on Fox, and then the second season, still on Fox, went weird. It went post-apocalyptic. Dr. Gangrene wins in the season 2 premiere, and then has to realize, I don't know anything about running the world. Oh man, I always wanted to rule the world, but I don't know what I'm doing. And it takes a tonal shift between seasons 1 and 2. That's a bit of whiplash. Oh, and the fact that Fox did not air the episodes in order, even though it's not continuity based, but you do have to see certain episodes before other episodes. And Fox decided, nah, screw it. This is a dumb kid show. We'll just throw this out there. So Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the animated series, again, not available on DVD, but I believe all, if not most of the episodes are on YouTube, but you should really check that one out. Sticking with animated, there is the MTV series Aeon Flux, which was a spin-off of their animated anthology series, Liquid Television. I remember watching all of these back in 1991. And I picked up the DVD recently, first time rewatching them in 25 years, and they hold up quite a bit. Not everything holds up in it. I almost literally can't describe Aeon Flux, the series. It's almost beyond description, intentionally so. But I do recommend Aeon Flux, the series, but you gotta be prepared that this is some weird cable stuff, and you're not going to just be able to get into it. And the DVDs do include all of the shorts from Liquid Television, so if you do pick up the DVD for Aeon Flux, then you'll be set. Just avoid the movie. Let's not talk about the movie. I'd rather not talk about the movie. But then there's something like Space Precinct, This might be one of the more obscure ones on this week's list because of the fact that Space Precinct got caught in the first-run syndication wars of the mid-90s. This was right around the time when Hercules: The Legendary Journeys came out, and everyone had a first-run syndicated series, like RoboCop the series and all this, and Space Precinct just got caught in there's not enough time slots for this. So in most markets, in America at least, Space Precinct got lost in that 3 a.m. on a UHF channel sort of thing, and most people never had heard of this one before. It had an action figure line that nobody bought, but it's exactly what you think it is. It's a Space Precinct. It's a cop show in space with Muppets. Well, I shouldn't say Muppets. Jim Henson wasn't involved. This was by the same people that did Thunderbirds and all that. It was a British-American co-production, and it was kind of like, what if NYPD Blue were on a space station in another galaxy? And you also get, even though he's dubbed so you can't hear him, Idris Elba's first acting role as a space pizza delivery man in an episode of Space Precinct. I wish I were making that up, but I am not. Then you've got another weird one that I didn't catch until reruns. I don't remember this one in 2001, but Dark Realm. Eric Roberts was the host, and I absolutely love Eric Roberts. I've worked with the guy, and he is so beyond cool in regular day-to-day life, too. Dark Realm, this is probably the worst one on this week's list. The stories are so forgettable. They're so bland. It's an anthology film with kind of horror elements or crime elements. The only reason I would recommend Dark Realm at all is for Eric Roberts, because Eric Roberts just commands the screen, even when he is not trying, like when he's in a David Dakota movie and clearly doesn't want to be there. The man has screen presence, and he does as the host of Dark Realm. Then the last one is probably the most dated one we're going to talk about here, VR5. Remember that virtual reality trend in the mid-90s with Lawnmower Man and Virtuosity and all that? This was right in there. This was Laurie Singer in a virtual reality world being able to manipulate things, and there's a conspiracy because it's post-X-Files, so of course there's a conspiracy. VR5 is so dated, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It is just a beyond dated show, but it's really fun. Again, Fox decided, why should we air this continuity-based series in order? That's just dumb. So if you watched it first run like I did, it made no sense. When you watch them later off of YouTube or off bootlegs, it makes a lot more sense when you're actually watching them in the order that they take place. But it's called VR5. You got Penn Jillette in the first episode. It's really an interesting show. That's what I'll say. It's an interesting show. So there's some shows to check out. And I honestly would like to know, after you guys check some of these out, what you think of them. I also think, how many of these, I'd like to know, how many of these have you actually heard of? How many of these am I bringing to your attention for the first time? Or how many of these are you going to go, oh my God, I remember watching that. Wow, do I remember watching that? So I hope you were informed this week. I hope my ranting and my negativity was not too much, but the last two segments were positive. So I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you, of course, by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd also like to ask that you remember to subscribe to the show and write a review. It really helps us. Also, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and IG. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.